Have you ever been curious about the fascinating world of historical miniature wargaming? I know I sure have. Welcome to Hobby Time in the Murder Basement. This week, we sit down and talk to Little Wars TV, fantastic YouTube channel all about historical miniature wargaming. Like, share, subscribe. Thank you so much for being here.
So I thought that 40K level of vitriol was like the common level of nerd rage. But when someone uses the wrong paint in a historical like setting, like that tank would not be fucking painted that. Like it's like it ruined the whole immersion for the person on the other side of the table. And I'm like, it's a green tank. And they're like, it's not the right shade of green. And I have seen this in person where I was just like, okay, I don't know what you do with that level of like hobby dedication, although that level of passion to me is kind of touching and inspiring, if not a little neurotic and obscene. So Stephen and Tony, thank you so much for joining me tonight in the Murder Basement. Stephen and Tony are part of a collective of Little Wars TV. On YouTube. It's just been doing it for how many years have you guys been doing it?
Just over 2 years. I think it was July of 2018 that we premiered our first episode.
Okay, and doing like weekly content on there?
Yeah, we were doing weekly content certainly through what we considered our first season, which lasted, I think, until December or the following December or January, then went on a little bit of a slowdown. So maybe we were posting something every other week. Last year, starting again, July of 2019, we tried to have something up weekly. And not necessarily our main tentpole episodes, which if people have watched Little Wars TV, they know we have main episodes and then we have kind of side content. And now we've just started our third season, although we're switching up our way of presenting things. And videos are probably going to come out a little less often, just because of the demands of it not being anybody's full-time job, and we have to fit it around our real jobs and our families and stuff like that. But we're trying to not have any big gaps during the course of the year like we did. We're actually kind of moving away from a season structure. So even though it might be every other week that you get a video, you're going to get them constantly throughout the year instead of weekly for like 6 months.
Going to year-round school instead of that summer vacation.
Exactly.
There was a little hiccup in the spring of this year that kind of screwed up our plans and our schedules just a smidgen.
Yeah, and we're still suffering from that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing that I think actual game groups, it's like one of the most COVID has devastated the landscape, and moving to like playing things on Tabletop Simulator. I don't know if you guys have tried doing that.
Absolutely.
I've done it a couple times. It is not. I don't like doing it on board games where it's kind of designed to work with them. It's really hard to do it with like a bunch of fiddly little pieces, and it's a challenge.
I agree. I mean, particularly when we start talking about complex war games, they don't translate really well, I think, over video, so they have to be much simpler rule sets. And even then, I mean, for all of us are miniatures war gamers, we like the tactile part of it. We like standing around the table, talking to people, reaching out, feeling the weight of the miniatures, moving them around, rolling the dice. It's just not the same when you're clicking or watching someone roll the dice for you. It's the best that we can do when we can't gather. Unfortunately, Tony and I and the rest of the club, we have been able to gather together at the club space for a couple months now. We do take precautions. Nice. But yeah, the video gaming, should probably come up with a different term for that since there already is video gaming. But no, the teleconferencing gaming, we'll call it that. It doesn't really fill the desires that I have to do that gaming.
Completely unsatisfying, I believe, is the term you're looking for.
Yeah, very pithy but accurate.
Yeah,
I have
it's
tried.
like a lap
I
dance.
engage.
Like you get you into the zone, but you never fucking finish. It's the worst.
So
I like it.
yeah,
I
so
like
right. I've
Yeah.
tried. Some friends have run some online role-playing games. I've tried some online games with other people running them. There's that lack of, as Steve said, even though the tabletop role-playing games were originally theater of the mind, there's still that lack of sense of community, that knowing wink from somebody across the table right before you launch into whatever mayhem you have planned.
Right.
That's missing, and just it feels very vanilla and very bland.
Yeah, I will say this though. For those of us who are fortunate to have a local game group or a game group that we game with regularly, it really is unsatisfying. However, as I've discovered in talking to some people, some who have been involved with Little Wars TV even from afar, because not everybody who does some of the work on our videos is local to us here in Pennsylvania. Some of these folks, particularly as historical gamers, where it's harder to find people to play with than it is if you're Warhammer or Legion or something along those lines. By all these people around the world being forced to go to online video conference gaming, it actually gives them a chance to game with other people. And
True.
so for them, it's great. And I don't want to make it sound like it's all doom and gloom and terrible for everybody involved in the hobby, because some people are now able to play with other people that they have not been able to do before. And that's going to continue even after, COVID is lifted, because they don't have any local gaming partners.
Correct. And I think for me, because I've played a lot of war games, and while I haven't done it for a long time, I've been a gamer my whole life, and so like I'm used to the watching the tables turn and like understanding the flow of a game. And so I was playing, the last one I did was with one of my buddies, and he had no idea that he was going to kick my ass. Like he thought I was going to wreck him, and like I could look at the board and I knew the math, and like I made a valiant effort to like stay really positive even though I knew I was going to lose.
Mm-hmm.
And he just he never could get the vibe of it, and that was the thing that really bummed me out, because I think if we were doing it in person, he would have actually saw the window. He could have done the math a little bit clearer. I think that would have been something that I think he would have really relished the win, because he did. He stomped me into the dirt like really bad, and he just didn't even know that he was doing it. I was like, dude, you have literally killed almost everything. And he's just like, yeah, but you got these things. It's like, don't you worry about those things. They aren't gonna
Take the win.
Yeah, just take the win. So what's your guys' history in the hobby? Like, how did you guys get started into wargaming, and then maybe like where did that take the turn into historicals? Because historicals don't hit everybody, and in fact, you guys have done multiple episodes on how do you actually get people into this corner of the hobby, which is fruitful but also like a little hidden.
Go ahead, Tony.
Okay. Let me preface this by explaining that I am what we refer to as old. I started gaming with Avalon Hill's Panzerblitz and Midway back in the mid 70s. I was probably 11 when I started wargaming, and played board war games late 70s. My junior high English teacher, rest his soul, he was a great guy, but last year, 8th grade, he mentioned this game, Dungeons and Dragons, and I was reading The Hobbit at the time, and I was fascinated. I had some friends who had just discovered the SCA and were getting into that, and I had a long spell of doing fantasy role playing, but I've always come back to playing Dungeons and Dragons and doing historical gaming. I've tried like 40K and Warhammer Fantasy Battles and that, but I've always come back to play some Dungeons and Dragons and, oh, what is that? Battle of the Bulge? Sure. Let's go fight some Germans.
Well, I'm so glad that you said SCA because one of my friends just casually slipped SCA into a conversation, and I was like, it is not every day that you hear the Society of Creative Anachronisms, pop up. Like that was like one of my first things. Like I never did D&D, but I SCA'd with friends, and played pirates because that to me made a lot more sense than like rolling dice. And coming from a theater background, I could, play a thief and have a lot of fun. And then at the end of the weekend, try to gather up all my stuff as it's been scattered all across the camp. So that's pretty awesome that came up. That takes me way back.
Yeah, as far as my story, I'm just slightly younger than Tony. So while he's old, I'm just not yet quite as old. But well, I was never an SCA. I mean, it started out with D&D for me, as a kid growing up in the 70s and very early 80s. But I always had an interest in history. So, I was also, once I got into D&D and and games like that, I also started looking at, okay, there must be history-based games out there. And so Avalon Hill, of course, immediately became something that I paid attention to, picked up a bunch of those games. Also began my computer gaming career, but with the Avalon Hill port to the Commodore 64 of their game
Love
Midway. And, so it was, for me, it became a little bit of a mix of board war games and, Battletech was probably the closest thing that I came to a miniatures game. I started playing Battletech with my friends in high school immediately when it came out. And that was when they still had the fold over paper standee figures. There weren't actually lead figures for that. And
Nice.
did that through high school, and then college, law school, and probably the first 10 years of my my legal career, I didn't really do any gaming. Just kind of got away from it. And then, one day I was actually kind of bored at work at the office one day. I'd finished all my work for the week. I think it was a Friday, and I'm thinking, play by email has popped up. And I'm sure there's ways of playing all these old board war games that I just found in my basement a week or two before that I had packed away. Ran a search, and to my shock, I discovered that like the ground zero in the United States for historical miniature wargaming is Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which is about 45 minutes from my house. And like only a couple weeks later, they were going to have one of their big 3 historical miniature wargaming conventions. So I'm like, well, shit, I'm taking the day off and I'm going to see what this is all about.
Sure.
And, I walk into this, convention center and see hundreds and hundreds of games with these historical miniatures playing, complex recreations of all these battles that I've spent years reading about. And I'm like, I found my people. And so that was probably a good 10, 11 years ago. So I only really hit true miniature gaming about a decade ago, but I've been a war gamer since I was probably 7 or 8 years old.
Well, I mean, I think that works out good. It allows you to get rid of some of your student debt and, buy a house and move on with your life before like plummeting deep into the depth of plastic crack and white metal crack. It's amazing how this hobby will take over your life.
Well, it's certainly nice to have a job and be able to afford this hobby because it isn't cheap. It takes a lot of money and a lot of time if you're going to paint all your stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was a video gamer. I started off on the Commodore 64. I actually I don't have one anymore, but up until earlier this year, I had one. And, I would still bust it out. I would compose music on it because those SID chips, they were monsters of the sound chip. And I just, Nintendo RPGs, Dungeons and Dragons totally missed me. Like I played Hero Quest as a kid, but I never understood that like they didn't name the characters so you could make the characters. Like they wanted you they gave you a play set to do something, and I just didn't get it. And then by the time role playing came into my life, it was, you know, like really, really bad people, just bad groups, you know, not good matches. And so like I just avoided all of these things. And it bums me out because now I'm having way more fun theater of the minding, you know, and like you guys are talking old school D&D, like these guys right here, I don't know if you can see it, the
Yes.
old school essentials, like it, like 5th edition I bounced off of. I did not like I didn't like everything being explained. I didn't like the fact that there was a world that felt like I had to play within it. And this is just enough abstraction that I could just like give myself over to the process. And God, I love it.
It's funny that you should hold that up. I'm currently working around COVID, currently running a loose campaign using Frog God Games Swords and Wizardry.
Sure.
Because
it's a great rule set.
You're right. There's no structure there. You can do whatever it is you want to do. And
yeah, well, and I think that the OSR scene is right now to me like where all the real creative stuff is happening. It's like if there's ever a punk rock for role playing, it's happening in the like old school D&D scene right now. They have all these amazing zines and just like cool grassroots, like get it out there. We're only making 100 copies of this thing, 200 copies worldwide, and there's something about that like I can't help it. It scratches like the old record collector itch in me. Like I just like get into the world around it and just like the culture of, you know, I'm one guy. I drew this thing. I wrote this little story. It has typos. It's not balanced. And like, I don't know. I love that. And it seems like historical gaming kind of has had a very similar sort of like, it's like the more dignified punk rock. It's like, you know, like progressive.
We're
rock,
not at all
know.
dignified.
Yeah. But it doesn't happen out front. It's part of the culture, but it's always like a little left wing, you know, like off to the side where like nobody is paying too much attention to it, which is interesting because I can't quite figure it out. But I also personally can't quite figure out why it exists in the same sentence. Like I'm have this it perplexes me in ways that like is so hard to wrap my head around, because like it's cool, the historical you know, nature of it is interesting until you have to convince somebody to play a Nazi. You know, and then I'm like very confused about like, you know, there's so much time and dedication that goes into it. I don't know if I want to play the Nazi.
well, and there's
it's fun. It's funny you mentioned that. I mean, you know, for our podcast, Little Wars FM, Tony and I are actually scheduled to do an episode where we discuss exactly that. It's like, you know, how do you play the bad guys?
Right.
And the only way to really do it, and I think this is where the, you know, historical aspect of it really comes in, and how it is that I can go in and play a game as the Germans in World War II, or, you know, pick any group that has been, you know, diabolical, the Confederate States during the Civil War. At that point, it's like, okay, we're going to play a game, and it's a game, but for us, it's also an exploration of history, and it's an exploration of military history and how this battle played out and how things might have been done differently. And so it's a ton of fun, but also I think the appeal for a lot of historical gamers is there is an element of an academic exercise as well. And if you're going to do that, and if you focus on that, and that's why you're doing it, to have fun and learn a little bit more about history, then, you know, you can say, okay, I'm not going to adopt the philosophy of the side I'm playing,
right.
But I am going to nonetheless play them as they were, as we as a group try and explore what happened on this particular date in history. Now, that being said, I have certainly gamed with people who I strongly suspect do sympathize with the philosophies of the Confederacy or, you know, the Nazis, and that's a really, really uncomfortable experience.
Sure.
Yeah, and there is that there's a line there, and Steve had just mentioned it, and I've seen it as well, where some people are playing the Nazis and Confederates because that's where their worldview lies, and it is, but it's a very small percentage of the people.
Okay, good.
I'll be honest. If we're doing a Gettysburg battle, I want to be General Lee.
Mm-hmm.
Not because I want to emulate any of the Confederate States' nonsensical beliefs, but I have from childhood, probably 12 years old when I read Coddington's The Gettysburg Campaign, I've been convinced that if only this had gone right, or if only that had gone right, Lee could have won at Gettysburg. So if there's a chance to do a Gettysburg battle, by God, I'm going to play General Lee, and I'm going to do my worst Southern accent, and I'm going to attempt one more time. And Greg and I talked about it, one of the other members of our group talked about it on a podcast, that there's the joke, and because Lee couldn't win at Gettysburg, but in the back of your mind, part of the appeal of doing historical gaming is that, can I do better than Lee? Can I do better than Alexander? Can I do better than Patton or Rommel? And that's also how, in a lot of cases, you wind up playing the Germans or playing these guys or those guys or the other guys, because there's that tactical problem.
Sure.
This is the historical outcome, and I can do better than that. Also, with any game, and you know it, there's that, it doesn't matter which side it is that you're playing. It's because, by God, Steve beat me playing such and such the other week, and now this is my opportunity to take a big dump on him.
Sure.
And I mean, Tony touches on something that I think is very different about most historical miniatures gaming than like a Warhammer type experience. Yeah, I never really played Warhammer. It wasn't part of my growing up. Just like you said, D&D missed you, Heath. Well, Warhammer just completely missed me somehow.
Sure.
But you know, we certainly have plenty of club members who have played in it. I'm familiar with it and that sort of stuff. Their games are very much set up around, okay, you're going to bring your 1,000-point army against my 1,000-point army, and inherently through the use of the point system, the armies are supposed to be roughly equal. Yeah. And so, yeah, you might have some special abilities on one side or another, but it's supposed to be a straight-up fight. Well, as Tony points out, if you're playing historical battles, it's very, very rare that a historical battle was a perfectly even straight-up fight, mostly because a good general or a good admiral doesn't get into a straight-up fight. They want the advantage, and if you have a disadvantage, it's usually because you've made an error. So then with this, asymmetry between the sides, it becomes a tactical challenge, not necessarily to win by driving your enemy from the field, but just to do better than your historical counterpart did. We have played, in one of our episodes was a Fallujah war game from the invasion of Iraq. The insurgents there have no chance of beating the United States Army. They don't have tanks, stuff like that. So you have to set the victory conditions, quote unquote victory conditions, in a very different way for them than you would for the player who's, running the U.S. Army. And that's where I think you get a really large difference between historicals and the more mainstream sci-fi and fantasy stuff, which for some people it's hard to cross that bridge.
Sure. Well, so since I don't know, I have a couple historical books that were given out in the last Adepticon swag box, and I looked at them and I'm like, this is not for me, but when you're doing a battle recreation, it's to the idea that the two sides are what they would have brought to the battle. So they're you aren't playing the alternate history where Lee's been kicking a lot more ass than he did, and he also brought this extra stuff that he didn't have. You're playing kind of to what the actual battles would have been set up with.
I think we do for the most part, but that's not to say that you can't do those what if battles. We've done what if battles as well. Those can
Mhm.
be fascinating.
We
Interesting.
did what was supposed to be a Gettysburg campaign, where it started out with Lee leaving his lines on the Potomac and the Rappahannock and sweeping up into Pennsylvania, and the Army of the Potomac moving from D.C. And we did map moves, and we did it via email and Facebook Messenger and issuing orders to commanders, and nobody knew the big picture. Um, even Lee and Meade didn't know the big picture. Even at the end of the game, nobody was completely sure where some of the units had slipped off to. But it wound up, the big battle wound up not being Gettysburg, but Emmetsburg.
Emmitsburg, Maryland, instead of Gettysburg,
Yep.
Pennsylvania.
And
That's
it
where our
was,
armies collided.
and it was a very, it wasn't decisive. The battle, neither side at that point knew fully where the other side's whole army was. So while it was that big 3-day battle, just as Gettysburg was, it was it was fought very cautiously by both sides, because both sides were still convinced that the other side has more units just over those hills over there. And we've done some historical campaigns that have produced some very ahistorical battles. And the one thing I find about campaigns, whether it's a fantasy campaign or an historical campaign, when it's a campaign and these are all the troops you have, and it has to last you through the end of the campaign, suddenly every tabletop general is cautious. When it's just this battle on the table, whether it's my orcs versus your dwarves, or his French versus my Russians in a Napoleonic game, if it's just put the figures on the table at some point or another, oh, look at the time, it's getting late, everybody charge. But
Okay.
if what happens on the table tonight matters for the next engagement, suddenly we'll just skirmish with them a little bit and we'll scoot off the edge of the table.
Interesting. I never would have suspected that there would have been more a more respect of human life pulled along with this. Even though that would be my hope, because dealing with historical battles, like especially when you're doing like video games tried to tackle Fallujah, and there was this game famously called 6 Days in Fallujah that just got scrapped because they just couldn't do it in a way that was tasteful, and it's a really hard sell to like do like modern stuff. Like people's feelings are too hurt, and like the Confederacy is something that like especially now, like you guys did did the video a couple days ago or a couple weeks ago of the like kids first army, and you could get the 2-player box set of the Union versus the Confederacy.
Oh, the wooden soldiers, yes.
And I was like, this is so cool, but also little Bobby has to fight for racism. This sucks. Like everything about it, I was like, this is so, like I'm totally with you. I think you got to get kids thinking about the abstraction of war and tactics and things very differently, and start them at a younger age. But also, like, I don't know if in today's climate 2020 is ready for a kid being like, this is my Confederate army.
Well, and that's a thing that's come up in conversation quite frequently. And when you're trying to get children involved, that's certainly a consideration. Okay, Billy, here's some stormtroopers. Yeah, not so much. On the other hand, there are plenty of historical battles and wars going back into antiquity where, while this side or the other side may have been monstrous in how they prosecuted the war, it is so remote in history that the only thing we know about them is, well, they had red cloaks and plumes in their helmets, and that's what 99% of the populace thinks of them. So if we get little Billy playing, Rome versus Carthage, or Arthurian Britain, or Greeks outside of Troy, it won't be till little Billy is working on his master's degree that he starts really looking at the politics of these events and thinking,
Right.
oh, some of these people were bastards.
Oh yeah, well, and so that's actually was going to be kind of something that I wanted to get into is like, Warlord Games is really big at pushing. Another thing that you guys talk about is a hard thing getting in is that no one company is producing like
Right.
a big game set right now, and probably Warlord Games being our like closest to doing it. And they have like the Roman Empire one that's fairly new. They have a couple other historicals. They're bolt action
Bolt
and
action is
things.
huge.
Huge, yeah. That's a really interesting thing to see a company like that like taking the chance. And do you guys see the old like going back to like a Roman era style war game? Is that popular? Do people do that? Because I don't know anybody personally doing it, but that's where I think I would actually really be interested in digging into that sort of lore.
Sure. I mean,
or history.
you'll find, when you start digging into the historical gamers out there, that there are historical miniature wargaming is a niche hobby. Okay, so we're not talking about huge numbers here, but within that universe, within that small contracted universe, there are significant fans of virtually every era through human history, all the way from their Stone Age games and cavemen, all the way up to ultra modern stuff and
Really?
near future. Oh yeah, we've played games in the club using a set of rules that one of our club members wrote called Sticks and Stones, and he has beautiful Neanderthal miniatures and mammoths, and the whole object is to slay the beasts and get more meat than the other tribe, all the way up to the ultra modern stuff. And honestly, at Little Wars TV, we have published at this point, this will change a little later this year, one set of official Little Wars TV rules, and it's for the Ancients period. It's Age of Hannibal is what it's called. It's based off of Chipko Fantasy, which was out 20 years ago, I think it was, and it's been selling very well for a historical miniatures rule set, and we regularly play Ancients, usually big battle stuff with little 6mm figures. I will, as I always do when I have the opportunity, point out that my Macedonian army is undefeated, despite having taken the field many times over the last 5 or 6 years. No one has defeated my phalangites. But yeah, Ancients are absolutely popular.
That's actually very exciting to me because and that whole 6mm thing, like I've never done anything that small, and for my background, like I'm way more of a hobbyist than I am a gamer, just because that's just what I don't have the time to dedicate 3 or 4 hours a week to playing a game, but I can sit down for 20 minutes to an hour a couple nights a week and throw paint on a model. So I get like way in the weeds on that, and and now I'm like painting for competitions because I don't have games, so I might as well like dig into one model that I really love looking at, and I'll have it this nice piece in my display case. But like typically historical armies are smaller than like a 25mm. They're like 15mm, 6mm, and there's something about that that's really attractive to me. And like who are the players as far as making those models right now?
There's about 1,000 of them. That's
oh no.
Oh yeah.
No, I mean, if you look at a particular scale, like say 6mm, you're really looking at maybe 3 or 4 companies that produce high quality 6mm figures. Bacchus, Heroics and Ross. Who am I forgetting, Tony?
GHQ, if you're looking for armor like tanks, World War II to present.
Adler.
The Adler for Napoleonics and stuff like that. Those would be Scotia if you're looking for 1/300 6mm scale aircraft. They do a huge range. All my Check Your Six stuff are mostly Scotia. They do a huge range of everything from World War I to modern jets in that 6mm scale.
Oh,
But
cool.
to your point, Heath, though, I mean, there's no one doing anything like what Warlord is trying to do with 28 millimeter, World War II and bolt action, or I'm not sure exactly the scale of their Cruel Seas, but they're trying to put together rules and box sets with the figures in them, so it's one-stop shopping. No one's really doing that at the 6 millimeter scale. I know Dave Enstenis with the Wargaming Company and Napoleonics, and I think his stuff is 10 millimeter.
Yep, 10 millimeter.
He's trying to do kind of box sets for Big Battle Napoleonics, and I think that really is a way that more historical companies need to go, because as we see more gamers coming over from the fantasy and sci-fi space, where they're used to being able to walk into a store and say, okay, I want this starter set. It becomes very intimidating for them to try and jump into historicals when they ask a question like you did of us here and say, well, where do I want to go if I want 6 millimeter figures? Well,
Right?
let's give you a list of 7 or 8, depending on the era, and then we'll have to get into a whole different conversation about what rules you want to use.
So
And that is,
has 3D printing come into play with you guys? Like, because it's fucking up our world, and I'm glad, because some people have had a stranglehold on us, and I'm tired of having a boot on my neck. And I love the idea of, like, if you're gonna get into modding an army and customizing something, like, do it. Like, and 3D printing allows that. That allows you to get in, have what you think is your army, and I could see that working for historicals really well.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it was last spring of 2019, I did a series on 3D printing for the historical gamer on the channel. It's become a little dated because technology moves very quickly.
Oh, it's changing daily now.
I picked up my first FDM printer about 2 years ago. I don't think I've bought a piece of terrain since then. I've printed everything.
Yeah.
And then I was able to get my hands on
a summer home.
Yeah, just pretty much. Then I picked up a resin printer, an SLA. And so now, I can print my own miniatures as long as I can find the files, because I'm not a good 3D designer for figures. I do 3D design for structures and terrain. And I use the FDM for terrain. And it's fantastic. And I think, and I said, when I did that series, that I think it is going to dramatically change the wargaming landscape, and has already started to do so. And for manufacturers out there who aren't, looking at a way that they can pivot their business model to deal with 3D printing, either taking advantage of it or figuring out a way to continue to exist while their customers have these other potentially cheaper options, they're making a huge mistake, because I think within the next 5 to 10 years, it is just going to take over broad swaths of the wargaming industry.
Sure.
Well, and Heath made a good point when you said that, the boot on your neck and I think I know where you were looking there when you said that. But in the fantasy and sci-fi gaming community, there are a couple of gargantuan players. And while that makes it easy for people to get into that, because you can go to the local brick and mortar place and buy a starter set with both sides and some rules and some terrain in a box, there's a couple of big players that have most of that wrapped up. And while in the historical miniatures side of it, that is kind of a bar to entry, in that, well, this company makes a rule set that we like, and that company makes a miniature, and this guy over here in his basement carves trees out of clothespins and sells them to us at a discount. The 3D printing, I don't think will have as an immediately large, meaningful impact on the historical miniatures as it will on the sci-fi and fantasy stuff, because you're basically looking at everything coming from just a couple of huge corporate entities, and now 3D printers they have the ability to march like Sherman through that nonsense, and now every man can print space naval auxiliary or something.
And
along
I'll
those
I'll
lines.
throw in some rank speculation here. I have absolutely no hard data to back this up, but you also, well, I mean, a little bit of hard data. The historical gaming community tends to be older than the sci-fi fantasy gaming community.
Sure.
And which generationally, who is typically more into new technology? Younger folks. Who is typically more willing to go out there, take the time to learn a 3D modeling or sculpting program where they can build models and throw things up on Thingiverse for people to download? That's going to be younger folks too. So where are they going to look first? They're going to look at doing the sci-fi and fantasy games that they're interested in, whereas it's going to take just older weirdos like me who actually sit down and try and figure out 3D printing and some 3D CAD drawing and stuff like that for historical things. I mean, I was not aware of anyone out there who was doing 3D printing for 6mm historical figures until we got hooked up with Aaron from Project Wargaming, who participated in our debut episode for this season 3, which just went live yesterday. And he is using Tinkercad to sculpt 6mm Crusade era figures, 6mm Samurai era figures. And I've been working with him and testing some of his prints, but he's one of the first who is doing a wide range of 6mm historical specifically for the 3D printing market. And I think Tony's absolutely right. There's going to be a slower take up on the historical side, but it's going to happen. There's no way it's not.
Well, it's, to me, like with things like Patreon right now, and I think where 3D printing is really hurting people, and I don't know if it's hurting people, so to say, but like it's cutting into Reaper and WizKids and that, like the D&D minis right now, that is where 3D printing is just like chewing on it, because like, oh, we can do all the fantasy shit. Army stuff, like for like modifying, I think that it's doing it's doing its work, but I don't think everybody's still going to go to GW or Corvus Belli or Privateer Press and get the models from them, and then they'll embellish them with 3D printed stuff, because you want consistency. And when you have to bring 2,000 points of something, you don't want to 3D print the entire army. But like the scale of something like 6mm, it seems like with like the way that Patreon is working right now, where people are like, I'm writing a rule set, you can give me $5 a month and I can give you 3D printing files, or $10 a month or whatever. I could see that being like a real cool model that like Osprey Games or something like that could take up, because they have the people, they have the brain trust there to do stuff. They don't have the capital to like do all of the like molds and to do huge runs of models, unless if it's popular, like Frostgrave. They did. Frostgrave was big enough for them to invest into, and that's a really interesting thing, because a company like that, everybody has an Osprey book on their wall. Like they're super important to the wargaming community, but I don't know anybody who has an Osprey model, like, and they make them. So that's where I want to see this stuff happen, because if Osprey could do that, I mean, I bet you they would like. I could see the amount of money that they make, quadruple overnight, just like that.
Well, and you're right about like 3D printing isn't going to get rid of Space Marines, because let's face it, Space Marines are trademarked. If you start making your own Space Marines, somebody Steve knows in his professional community will be sending you a letter warning you to please stop doing that. On the other hand, though, there's so much cool sci-fi. I've searched for some, historical terrain for 3D printing, and there's a building, yay. But if you type in, 28mm STL files, there's a metric shit ton of stuff for fantasy towers and sci-fi fixtures and this and that and the other thing. And I think that's where the change will happen first with like the Space Marines and 40K kind of stuff, is that now I can print whole cities. Someone in our club, and I won't mention their name, but they're sitting in one of the frames that I'm looking at now, printed printed a big goblin settlement city, to do a chase scene from a fantasy novel where perhaps a wizard and some dwarves
And a
some
halfling.
and a halfling or two find themselves before a goblin king and have to
Yeah.
make their escape. And what is that? It's probably like is it a 4x6 or is
Yeah,
it?
it's 6x4. That is actually my biggest project. My biggest gaming project that I undertook this year was not historical. Almost all of us in the club are huge Tolkien fans.
Sure.
And I had this idea years ago when my daughter was, I think, in 3rd grade, and her class was reading The Hobbit. And I figured, there's some scenes in that movie that would make for a great miniatures game. And the one that I latched onto was the dwarves, Gandalf and Bilbo, as they were trying to escape Goblin Town through the maze of caves, being chased by the goblins after Gandalf kills the Great Goblin.
Mm-hmm.
So I dreamed of this long before I ever thought about getting into 3D printing. Always kind of stalled out because I didn't know the best and easiest way to make the board.
Sure.
So I bought the GW Lord of the Rings figures and all that stuff, but didn't have a way of making the board until I got my 3D printer. And then there was a Kickstarter, and Kickstarter is a great thing for 3D printing gamers.
Yeah.
And there was a hex system by Axolot Gaming. I can't remember the guy's name, but I think he works out of Mexico City. But he's done a number of Kickstarters, and it gave everything I need for hex-based cavern designs. And I created a labyrinth that the good guys have to get from basically one end of the table to the other, and built in a way that Bilbo can be lost and end up with Gollum in the riddle game and all of that sort of stuff. And all of the terrain is 3D printed.
And it was awesome.
Yeah, I look forward. My intention is to run it at some conventions, and perhaps, even though we're a historical channel, we will occasionally do something that is non-historical, like we did the Battle of Endor for an episode, and maybe the Hobbit Escape from Goblin Town will make it on there as well.
I love it. Oh, and you know what? It's all Little Wars. Like, you aren't going off brand at that point.
No, but we do know who our core audience is, and we do try and do our fan service 99% of the time. But all of us, even Greg, when we make a joke about it, all of us do sci-fi gaming. All of us do fantasy gaming as well. Historicals may be our first love, but it is not our only love. And that's important for everybody to realize. It's not like once you decide, oh, I'm going to try historicals, that you have to have a tearful goodbye from all your Warhammer friends or anything like that. It's not like you're shipping off to war in reality. You're playing a different game. So, and you see it at the major historical conventions too. I think the typical stats from year to year, even at Historicon, the biggest historical miniatures wargaming convention in the United States, which takes place every July, except for this past July, of course, anywhere from 15 to 20% of the games that are being run at Historicon are fantasy or sci-fi.
Sure.
So, and some people bellyache about that. I don't have a problem with it whatsoever, because very few of us only play historicals.
Right. Well, and let's be honest. You can only do crunchy historical stuff for until you have to do something really fucking gonzo to it's a palate cleanser, and that gets you excited to do your next crunchy thing. But if I was only doing things that I had to take seriously in this hobby, I would have bounced off of it a long time ago. And what I have embraced is there's so much of this hobby that is just it's an addict's worst nightmare. It is everything all the time, and so if you get into it, it can take you to some really weird places. One of the things that caught my eye a while ago was the idea of Weird War, Weird West, that sort of idea. Do historical gamers like lean into that like alternate history thing, the steampunk stuff easier? Is that an easier
bite your
sell?
heretical tongue, young man.
Right.
I believe that is the most typical reaction. And Steve had said at Historicon, there's 15 or 20% of the games that are sci-fi, and in that number is the Weird War things, the Weird West, because there is some of that. Is there a lot of crossover? I don't know. Personally, I have no problem with a sci-fi universe or a fantasy universe. I have no problem with historical gaming. It's when you start to mingle Wyatt Earp with the zombies that I really start scratching my head about what are we doing here?
Sure.
Couldn't we have done one or the other?
Yeah, and there are those games, and there are rule sets that cater to those types of situations. There are also those games that show up at historical conventions. I have played in some of them. Most famously, one where I didn't know it was a zombie game when I went into it. I thought it was an actual, real, force on force, U.S. Army versus insurgents, and then they didn't put anything in the description about it being a zombie game, and then an hour into the game, all of a sudden zombies start showing up. I'm like, I didn't sign up for this. So it's out there, and those games can. I actually maybe a little bit more than Tony am certainly willing to mix those up, just because, like you said, sometimes you got to do something gonzo and crazy, and it's just like it's a cool thing to play around with. But again, I mean, for me, that's kind of a side thing every once in a while, but I can certainly understand why for some people that would be the chief thing that they're interested in. I know steampunk actually does make a fairly regular appearance at the conventions, because one club in particular, the Hawks out of Maryland, I think they have a couple of people who run at the conclusion of every convention, a big kind of Victorian sci-fi / steampunk road race as their kind of capstone event for a historical convention. I've never played in it, but I've heard it's a great time.
Sure.
And I've seen some, and we've dabbled in that a little bit in the club, in that Chow has run his Darkest Africa games, which...
That's all the pulp stuff, yeah.
Yeah, we've done some pulp stuff. We have done, Jason was running... he had a whole series of Hollow Earth adventures, and I bought and painted up a couple of parties of 28 millimeter adventures to explore the Hollow Earth, and that was a multiplayer game. Well, they were all multiplayer games where each side had a small group, and each player, the 6 of us, have a small group of explorers. So you're working to work your way across the landscape and find various things and make sense of this strange new world, while at the same time aiding or thwarting your fellow players' efforts as it suits your own interests.
I think Tony picks up on something that I see a lot more frequently on the historical side, and I think part of it is because for a lot of us it's a way that we fell in love with history from the first place. I will see a lot of games, and I've done a ton of it myself, where I am recreating, or GMs are recreating, cinematic experiences, movie scenes that may be loosely based on history, or sometimes more seriously, or only tenuously attached to history. But I for our virtual Historicon, I ran an Indiana Jones game, which
nice.
Yeah, it's 1930s, Indies racing against the Nazis to try and find something on an island that's been discovered in the Indian Ocean, and is it historical? Well, in the loosest sense of the word, yes, but it's also extremely pulpy, and it's more about the movie, and to have a figure that's there rolling to shoot a crocodile in the head so it doesn't eat him while he's trying to get across the river. I mean, that's just fun, and I would have no problem running that at a Historicon, and I'm sure that I could get plenty of players to do it.
Well, and that sounds so fun. Like that's the thing that you know, when you have like this like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle aspect of, you know, like this alternate history and like fantasy within like the realm of what the time was, the Victorian era, like it seems like that would be such a cool place to explore and play and push boundaries, you know.
It is. Now, I think the big problem that historical gaming has is an image problem. And you kind of touched on it at the very beginning, where what's the first thing you're talking about? You're talking about people who are yelling at you because the Panzer is painted the wrong color green. You know, in the club, we joke about Napoleonic gamers. They're the ones that really go nuts and worry about whether you've got the buttons on the uniform the right shade of brass. It's like, there are those people out there, and those are the people who would be watching this conversation we're having and basically pointing at Tony and I saying, you are not historical wargamers. It's gatekeeping of the worst sort, that if you are not, you know, consulting every Osprey and reading every 3,000 page book on the Napoleonic Wars, you're not a real historical wargamer. And it's incredibly short-sighted, and it loses sight of the fact that this is supposed to be fun. So, you know, I tend to take a much more expansive definition of what historical wargaming is than those types of folks. I'm like, if it's got some historical aspect to it, some sense in which it is hooked into real-life history, you can call it a historical wargaming. You know, real quickly, and then I know Tony has thoughts on this, bolt action. That's a historical wargame. But I know people who do not consider it a historical war game because the rule mechanisms don't allow you to recreate every single small unit tactic that was actually used in World War II. I look at that and I say, you've got to be kidding me. What rule set ever does? And here you have something where folks are researching the units, that the units are accurate as far as reflecting history. And no, you can't recreate every tactic, but you know what? You can recreate a whole heck of a lot of them. And guess what? The game's fun too. Right. So, you know, if you're going to sit here and say that that's not a historical war game, then you're going to ensure that historical wargaming, as you define it, ceases to exist in the not too distant future.
Right.
And I would add to that or expand on that in that for me, the historical wargaming rule set has to do two things. One, it has to be fun. And two, it has to provide me with some sense of being in the position of command and facing some of the challenges of commanding troops. That said, both of those two criteria are 100% subjective.
Sure.
Unless you've led troops in battle, in which case you may comment on the tactics used when gaming that battle. Even if you've led troops in battle, your experience leading troops in battle is only vaguely related to Hannibal's experience leading troops into battle 2,200 years ago. So the whole concept of what is fun and what is historically accurate are both being subjective. If you like bold action and I like flames of war, neither of us is doing this incorrectly.
Right.
We just have we go through this at the club. We have different tastes. I, for one, am generally not a skirmish gamer. There are some genres or some periods where I'd rather do skirmish games where just a handful of figures. But in broad terms, I like big battles. I'd rather be a field marshal than a lieutenant if the opportunity presents itself. We have guys in the club who are dedicated skirmish gamers. If you've got more than 12 models on the table, the game is too fiddly and there's too much to do.
Those are our less sophisticated members of the club. I'll just point that out.
Well, I mean, you touched on a couple of things there that I think that rule set is like key beyond like era of battle, because it actually doesn't matter what era of battle you are in. If the rule set doesn't allow for fun to happen, I think it's, you know, a dead rule set at that point. And so like when I sit back, and this is the thing that I fight with all the 40K players all the time. They all talk like 40K is this like revolutionary game. It's one of the slowest, clunkiest games I've ever played, and it's not fun. It's not fun. All you 40K people out there, it's not fun. Quit lying to yourself. Your confirmation bias is bullshit. Just understand.
I think the number of thumbs down, the thumbs downs you're going to get because of that are going to skyrocket.
I welcome it because I want somebody to tell me why it's fun. I've talked to the Long War people, and they're like, we play and we understand the rules to a point where the game goes, but like most people don't know the rule set to like the nth degree. And so they're always looking at their books. They're always looking, and so this thing that should be like a 20-minute back and forth, it turns into like 45 minutes to an hour per side. And that's not fun. Where like bolt action is you reach into a bag, you pull out a dice, and that's the team that goes. And then it's like, it can be alternating actions. It creates this abstraction to war that isn't I go, you go, I go, you go. Like war is chaos, and there should be a little level of on the spot planning and tactics that games like 40K I don't think give you that. I have played games where it gets there, but it's with people who know it. You can't casually play 40K and have that experience where like games like bolt action you can. They give you that. It's baked in.
And I think, part of that may go back to what we were talking about, or I was talking about earlier with 1,000 points versus 1,000 points. You have
Right.
Warhammer, which to me always, seems to be designed, for a tournament type setting. And in a tournament type setting, as soon as you start introducing randomness or friction, as Clausewitz who discussed friction in command, and you may want your troops to do something, but maybe they will, maybe they won't. When you start introducing that, then if you're in a tournament setting, people are automatically starting to complain, well, that's not fair. Well, war isn't fair. So a lot of historical rule sets will build that in one way or another, whether it's card activation or dice activation, or you have a certain number of command points, which is not enough for you to give orders to all of your units. So you have to decide what's more important or not. Rule sets handle that different ways. To your point about detail and stuff like that, there's always a bit of a debate amongst people when they're talking about rule sets, particularly on the historical side, because of the nature of what we're trying to game. Is a rule set, more towards the simulation end, or is it more towards the game end, or does it fall on the continuum somewhere in the middle? Because there are, games out there that are great simulations of historical conflict that are absolutely miserable to play because you get so much into the detail and it takes forever. I mean, there is a naval rule set out there called Sea Krieg, which has been through 5 or 6 iterations at this point, and it can be a battle between like 2 ships on each side. And it'll take 7 hours to play because you've got like multiple players per ship, and they're handling little damage control decisions every time that there's a hit. And there are certainly people who enjoy that. And so that product should be there for people to enjoy.
Of course, sure.
I am not one of those people. I don't necessarily want something that's a completely gamey experience. I want something that kind of falls in between. And finding that right balance, that's like Tony said, it's very subjective. And so that's why you have 15 different rule sets for World War II naval combat, because every one of those falls on a different place on the continuum. And it splinters up the players for that era a little bit, but it's everybody finds their niche.
Interesting.
That's something that takes sort of a gate of its own, a bar of its own to entrance in the historical hobby, is that in the fantasy and sci-fi hobby, there's 40K, there's Warhammer Fantasy and all the various spin-offs of that. And those two tend to dominate what is played. And even if not dominating what is played, almost everybody who's doing some sci-fi wargaming, some fantasy wargaming, is familiar with those rules and those concepts presented in those rules. Whereas because there are so many historical rules for any period, and if I look behind me on the shelves here, I've got rows and rows and rows of rule sets that I've collected over the years for all sorts of periods where I've got 15 or 20 different World War II rule sets, just land warfare and naval war and air war. But because there are so many little niches, both in the era and is it land warfare or naval warfare, air warfare, the era and the genre, and do we want a big battle, skirmish battle? The historical side of it is already a niche market, and it's fragmented into all these little overlapping or sometimes not groups. And our club is fortunate in that we are all lazy, so that if Steve says, hey, I'm going to run a Civil War ironclad battle on the Mississippi River game, 5 or 6 of us will go, shit, I don't have to think of anything. I could just show up and drink some scotch and move some miniatures. So yeah, that's what we'll play. It is, to a certain extent, it's because we're loafers. So if one guy is willing to run a game and I can do this for 5 or 6 people, screw that, sure. We'll stop and get a pizza, whatever.
I think it's a combination of that, and it's also a combination that we're a group of friends who have been gaming together for a long time. We enjoy each other's company.
Yeah.
And so that's as important as the game itself. And second of all, we're also just kind of interested in all sorts of different history. We all have specializations in what history we care about and research the most, but we're all just kind of interested in all sorts of different stuff, and we're willing to try new things. Tony makes an excellent point.
I did? When?
Yes, absolutely. All night so far. But the point he makes is that there is a tremendous challenge for anyone new coming into the historical wargaming hobby to find what is their perfect rule set.
Yeah.
The flip side of that is that once you find it, and it is out there for you, if you're looking for a particular type of game, level of complexity, ease of play, speed of play, you can find it for any period in history. It is out there. It's just going to take some hunting for it. And unfortunately, that becomes very intimidating as someone is looking to jump in for the first time. Just real quick story at our Facebook page, we got an email from a family in South Africa that had been watching our videos, and the family was interested into getting into historical miniatures wargaming, and sent the type of question that you would send to someone like us, which is, what would be a good game for us to start with?
Mm-hmm.
And it's an incredibly difficult question to answer without asking 15 questions.
Or just being a dick. You can be like, have you heard of this game Risk?
Well, we're trying to bring people into the hobby, not drive them away. So
pardon me, I've got to go delete a response. I'll be right back.
This is why we don't allow Tony to answer messages. But no, I basically engaged in a month-long conversation with this family, just kind of trying to draw out of them, okay, what era of history are you interested in? What time frame are you trying to get a game complete in? How many figures do you want to buy and paint up? Because as you start to get answers to those questions, then I can help them zoom in on exactly what it is that would be the best fit for them. And it may not be a game that I personally like, but it's a game I'm familiar with and I know, or at least think I know, will fit what they're looking for. But if you don't ask someone or know someone or have access to someone who has that knowledge, like we've built up over the years collectively, where do you start? You can go into your local hobby store and say, okay, here's a rule set about World War II. I'm interested in World War II. And you pick it up and you find out it's, the equivalent of Sea Creek that I mentioned a bit ago, and it's like, wait, I have to carve out 7 hours here and read a rule book that's this thick.
Yeah.
Why did I buy it? I thought there were more pictures. This is all very small text, and then very quickly they get turned off. And That's unfortunate.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, my first sort of idea when I saw like the historicals as being something that was more maybe something I wanted to pay attention to was not an actual historical. I guess you guys would call it the pulp, and it was like All's Quiet on the Martian Front. Like I saw those old tanks and then those old like 1950s style sci-fi things, and I was like, oh shit, I know this isn't real history, but like I think this kind of works for me, and I didn't buy into it. I don't even know if it's still a game anymore. It's one of those things that I'm a little nervous about. All these games kind of tend to have what you know, the evergreen content is carried on long after the life of the game, but the actual like people working on it have long since gone out of business or been bought out by other companies or whatever. You know, like it seems like
there's a very, very long and sordid story about that company.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes.
That Miles from our channel could fill you in on all the details because he had a front row seat to it.
Oh no.
But yeah, those were great figures, and it ultimately that my understanding of the story is they were kind of a victim of their own Kickstarter success on that very game, and you know, responded a little bit too aggressively to demands of more stretch goals and all that stuff, and it got to the point where once you start factoring in shipping, it ended up being a complete economic disaster for them. But I agree with you. I mean, the figures were beautiful. It looked like it was going to be a really fun system, and just kind of went away. Although I think the IP for All Quiet on the Western Front, Martian Front, or whatever it was called, I think has been picked up by someone. So there may be those figures out there, but the original company is no more.
And the idea of the Martian tripods and some World War One-ish miniatures, I would game the shit out of that.
Right.
If we get done here and I'm browsing around the interwebs and I see somebody is selling Martian tripods firing at some 20s vintage GIs, you know what? I'm maxing out what's left on my credit card. I'm getting all that stuff and add it to the 70 other projects that I'm never going to paint.
Heath, are you at all familiar with the company Zombie Smith and their Quar line?
I am not.
Okay, I own no interest in the company. They have not paid me for an advertisement, but they have an interesting product line. It's the Quar, Quar. I think it's Josh Qualtieri is the guy who runs Zombie Smith. I'm actually waiting for delivery of their 15mm Kickstarter that I backed months ago. That should be arriving any day. You know, I run like a kid out to the mailbox, and then each day I've walked back with my head hanging, not disappointed that it didn't arrive.
Dude, I'm Lady Death from Donnie Darko. I walk and check my mailbox like 3 or 4 times a day. I'm like, why is the mail not here yet? Yeah. What is going on?
No, the reason I bring it up is because it is definitely. It's a non-Earth setting. It's
Okay.
Quar. They're cool looking. It's an alien race, although it's not really sci-fi. But all of the technology that is used in the game is the equivalent of World War I level technology. And the tactics, there are rule sets that, I mean, they're part of the Kickstarter is publishing a second edition of the rules. But the idea is that it is World War I, but with an alien race.
Okay.
And it's not humans versus aliens; it's aliens versus aliens. It's the politics of their planet. But it's an interesting mix of historical and non-historical because you have historical weapons technology and tactics in a very ahistorical setting. And I'm looking forward to painting these up and throwing them on the table and just seeing how the folks in the club react to it. I have some of the 28mm, but the Kickstarter was for 15.
Interesting. That I mean, like, I love that idea, and this is the type of things that, like, for me, I will always have a trouble, like, and I don't want to say that I would instantly just be like, well, I'll play like the Nazis this time. But we all know, like, Nazis had the best fashion sense. Like, that's like the fucked up part about war. You know, like,
they were snappy dressers.
They were snappy dressers. You know, and like, and so like, I need the abstraction because I I'm too much of an empath. I start to research these things, and I just start like when I start looking at history, it starts seeping into my dreams. It becomes very upsetting. So I need the abstraction to give me, like some peace of mind a little bit, and something like that sounds really fun.
So, how many times would you have to play the Nazis before you start smashing out store windows? Just asking for a friend.
The problem with like that stuff is it wouldn't seep into like my daily life thing, but it would get to the point where like I don't want to, because of the way I obsess about stuff, I don't want to be having conversations about Nazi Germany. I don't want to be having those conversations about the Confederacy. Like it would be that thing and be like, did you know that they did? And like that's the stuff where like knowing that it happened is bad enough. Reliving it every day in my head as I talk too much is just going to be like a little too much for me, I think.
Yeah, and again, while will have the exceptions to the rule, I think generally speaking, you go to a convention. Certainly in our club, we're not talking the politics of the Civil War or the politics of or the philosophy of Nazi Germany when we're gaming out World War II or ACW stuff. It is very much about the particular strategic or tactical challenge that sits in front of us. And I think it's that way at a lot of the convention games too. I mean, and you will have people that they have their axe to grind and they're going to go in there and they're going to try and grind on it. And those are the games that it's just not fun for exactly that reason. It's like, I'm not going to sit here and debate with you, whether, the Confederacy had a point. Their chief point was they wanted to keep human slaves.
Yeah,
I'm against that.
I'm against that.
It's not. There's no gray area there.
Yeah, it's not even an unpopular opinion.
It's right.
It's just fact. It's not right.
At least in the last 3.5 years, prior to the last 3.5 years, it was not a popular opinion.
Well,
right.
And it's the same thing with the Nazis. It's like, yeah, they had pretty cool looking uniforms. That's about the only good thing I can say for them. And I don't want to sit here and watch some guy as he's just ecstatic because he's rolling all the sixes he needs to so that he can crush the Americans landing at Normandy. It's like
okay, so here's another hard thing. Like I know right now, and GW, like I give them a lot of credit for doing this. Whether or not they, back up their bark with a bite, I don't know. But like they straight up said, people who are intolerant of other people, who are racist, bigots, get out. We don't need you. What do you think the historical hobby is like? I mean, because like it definitely has a color problem. Like I don't know if you guys have noticed, there's not wargaming in general has a color problem. We need more people of color. We need more women. We need more people that can have a different philosophy and bring more character into the hobby space. But like when you see, a group of aged white dudes, you see people like younger than me where I get along with old white guys. I've always been, I was a 7-year-old old white guy. Like that was kind of me. But and
you do seem to be getting along with Tony and I, and we're
of course.
That, so.
But like you're gonna have troubles
over here.
It's gonna be hard convincing young people to get into that sort of thing, and I think because so many people right now just instantly goes, oh, old white guys, they got to be old conservative racists, and that's not fair, and no, it sucks that is the way it goes. But what do you see is the hurdle of getting over that, and is there a way of getting over that?
Yeah, there is that notion, and as a gray-haired old white guy with a pickup truck, I do occasionally, I want to stop occasionally and put down the window and go, I'm not one of them.
I'm not one of them.
Look on the back glass, there's a peace sign. Look, I'm not like
I'm a good guy.
I just look like that. I look like the stereotypical, but no, there is a certain perception, And sadly, like most stereotypes, at some point in people's, the reason people accept stereotypes is either just blind ignorance,
Sure.
or that stereotype somehow resonates. And I think the stereotype of the historical wargamer being this old conservative with a closeted love of Nazism, there is that small faction over there in the corner that is just that. The rest of us, while old white guy is the biggest demographic in historical miniatures gaming, the rest of us are not arch conservative neo-Nazi militarists, and getting that message out is indeed difficult. And I think it's compounded by the fact that we as historical miniature gamers lost a generation, in that I don't know if Steve remembers the exact numbers, but basically we're all in our 50s and older. The historical miniatures wargaming demographic is aging faster than the national demographic. So we're all on the other side of the curve at this point. And then there's a big broad gap. And then there's new people coming in who are millennials and younger. But like the Gen X people, there's like a whole generation there that somehow didn't get included because we were still rather exclusionary and, they play Dungeons and Dragons, be gone with you, heathen. So now we have that. There's a communication gap. To be honest, I think at its core, there's a communication gap. When I started trying to run a role-playing game again after some years, like 15, 20 years of absence from it, I discovered there's a whole new way of talking about characters. People will roll up tunes now instead of characters, and there's the healer and there's the tank, and I'm like, what are you talking about? And it took me a little while to get my head around that. And I think that as two communities, the non-historical gamers versus the historical gamers, because there's a big gap not only in culture but in age, there's some learning that both sides have to do about the other side.
Yeah.
And the historical gamers, I think, have to bear the burden of that because we're the smaller group who want to grow and hang on to what little life is left in us. Whereas the big block of the population is much younger and playing other games. So I think the impetus to change and to reach across the aisle falls on the historical gamers.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think there's a significant portion of historical gamers who simply aren't interested in doing that. They like their historical gaming the way that it is. They like the people that they play with, and they don't want other people coming in and messing it up for them. And I think that's incredibly short-sighted, and I think it's incredibly unfortunate. My outlook on this has really been colored significantly by two events during the lifetime of Little Wars TV. The first big one was when we posted our two-part series on women in historical wargaming. Greg took the lead on that based on survey results that we got from our partnership with Wargame Soldiers and Strategy magazine, and just basically asking the question, why is it that there are so few women interested in historical miniature wargaming? I mean, we understand that there are going to be less just because interest in military history tends to be more male than female. But even adjusting for that expectation of a lower percentage of gamers being female, the actual number is far lower than what we would have expected. Why is that? Just asking the question and interviewing 3 female wargamers about their experiences and what suggestions that they had to make brought out such vitriol in our comments and emails to Little Wars TV. It was really kind of shocking. And I mean, it became a political issue for a lot of people immediately. And there was a lot of, why are you, becoming a social justice warrior and forcing women on our gaming group? And we're like, we're not forcing women on anybody. I mean, we're just asking why aren't they as interested? And we got a lot of emails that are just because women aren't interested in this sort of thing. Well, that's kind of circular. We're asking why women aren't interested. We know that women aren't interested. That's not the answer to the question. Now, I make it sound like that's the vocal minority, right? Because we also got some wonderful comments, and certainly face to face, as I've talked to people who have brought it up to me, male and female, and also got some great emails, particularly from female gamers, going, "Thank you for bringing this up. Thank you for talking about ways," because men and women are different, okay? And how they game can be different because look, everybody's different, and when you're with a group of friends, even if it's just a bunch of white guys, everybody's going to have a different personality. Everybody's going to want to get something out of the game differently.
Sure.
So that was one that kind of opened my eyes that there is this really aggressive, protective, passive aggressive, come up with however you want to describe it, group in the historical wargaming community that's not very inclusive. But then the other part of it, which goes to Tony's point about skipping a generation, we're in that older generation, but we launched our Patreon a few weeks ago, and part of that was, look, if you're a patron, we give you access to our Discord channel. And partially because of what I talked about earlier about younger folks picking up on newer technology faster.
Yeah.
We've ended up moving, probably about 2/3 of our patrons have joined the Discord channel, and it's very quickly become a very active community, and it skews incredibly young.
Nice. Nice.
And it's fantastic because the enthusiasm is there. They're from all over the world, and it's a very cooperative environment and all of that sort of stuff. And I'm like, okay, so here are younger people. When I say younger people, I'm basically saying under 30. Okay.
Yeah.
That are really getting into this, are discovering it. Some of them because of what we're doing on YouTube. Some of it just because they came across it, or their dad was interested, or their mom was interested, or whatever. And so from an age perspective, I think there is that new generation that is coming in. Now, what kind of games are they playing? It's not the same ones as the crusty old grognards who are, wading through the book that's this thick,
Right.
But so, is the game dying out? No. Is wargaming, historical wargaming dying out? No. Is it changing? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, quick pivot. It's a tougher thing to address when you're talking about, race. Right.
Of course.
Pasty old white fat guys are the vast majority of attendees at historical conventions. Yeah, Tony's not fat. He's pasty white and old, but he is not fat. I'm less fat than I used to be, but still heavier than Tony.
No, I'm not fat. I was upset about the pasty part.
Oh well, you're pasty enough. But I don't know about that because I've never really been in a situation where I have experienced or witnessed overt racism on the part of a historical gamer, other than maybe, they identify really closely with the Confederacy. You can read something into that maybe, but
right.
It's not like I've ever had someone go, "No, you're not allowed to play this game because you're an African American."
Sure.
So, that would be another interesting topic to explore, but I don't know that we really have hard data to use as a leaping off point like we did with the gender issue. But I mean, there certainly are minority gamers, and I've played in games that are run by them. You see them at every convention. It's something that's an interesting question, but I can say personally for me, I don't care what color a gamer is, what sex they are, what they identify as. If they're a fun person to be around, who's interested in history and interested in playing a good game, that's all I care about. And I think we do have more and more people on the historical side that are taking that attitude, and maybe it's because some of the older grognards are passing on, unfortunate as that is from a life perspective.
It's an interesting sea change that's happening. Like my friend who got me into Warhammer, I say Warhammer sucks. I have 5 Warhammer armies, so fuck all y'all. My buddy who got me into it was black, and it's hilarious when we'll go to game stores and play, and we're really comfortable around each other. and we are the only people playing war games. Like everybody else is playing Magic the Gathering, which is like super inclusive and, you know, like very diverse group of people. And they look at us like, what the fuck is going on over there? This is not the group of people that I expected, you know, where we have one woman who, you know, was hanging out with us who, you know, she is, you know, non-binary and, you know, like it was such a great motley crew of people. And they're like, that this is not what we expected wargaming to be. You know, you guys are in like death metal t-shirts, and you know, like we were the oddity. You know, they're like, where are all the old white guys? And I think with the internet, it's helping, you know, expand, you know, the reach, especially people of color in the hobby. I'm going out of my way right now to try to understand why. And you know, like it sounds like gaming wasn't always part of, you know, their you know, childhoods. You know, they didn't have the luxury of having those things, and like I didn't have the luxury of doing a lot of it either. And that's why now in my, you know, late 30s, I'm reclaiming that kind of lost youth of like, this is what I should have been doing my entire youth. Instead of playing video games, I have more fun doing this hobby than I ever have had playing video games, because I have a community now where like I didn't have a community sitting alone in my bedroom playing a video game. Like I would talk with my friends at school about it, but then we go off to our corners. Like there's something about the war game hobby that is really unique, and you know, it's something that I want more people to experience, whether it's in historical or sci-fi or fantasy. Like it's such a holistic hobby. It hits us on so many different levels on this really primal, you know, like you're building something, you know, where like people don't build things anymore. People are thinking it's creative problem solving. Right. The game is the hobby, you know, and that's the thing that I love about it. And it actually doesn't really matter what I'm playing it in, just as long as I have people around. And that's what I'm hoping that this show can do, is get to people and, you know, get people to look at everybody a little bit more three-dimensionally. All the women I've talked to who play the games and or paint aren't just like the typical people that you would guess, you know, and you guys certainly aren't your stereotypical, you know, middle-aged white guys, you know, like it's very different, and something that I think is important that we, you know, try to get away from the stereotype. And I want to swing back around to the younger aspect of it, with the Patreon, because Patreon is something that I rejected for a really long time. It's not that I didn't want to support their creators doing stuff, but I like buying something, because like I don't have like extra money to throw at an organization every single month to keep them moving. But if they got a cool t-shirt, I'll figure out a way to get rid of an old t-shirt so I have room in the dresser. I'd never get rid of the old t-shirts. I have too many of them. But that's really exciting that the younger community is coming to Patreon, because ever since I've started my Patreon, I'm having very different conversations with the community. We are more like, you know, like family members at this point, and we talk about, you know, mental health. We like the hobby walls are totally broken down. It's not about the hobby, it's about people who want to hang out in a place together. Is that something that is happening in your community as well?
Oh, absolutely.
No question. And you know, it's funny because you know, I really, for the Patreon, that's my baby. That's my initiative for the channel that I've poured a ton of time into. Certainly others have been very heavily involved. Tony is one of them, you know, Greg, with certain aspects of the rewards, like, you know, getting every episode of our podcast. You can only do that if you are a patron. But the actual rollout and the structuring and stuff like that, you know, I've kind of been responsible for that. And I was really the one that was kind of on board earliest with the idea of, why don't we do this? And other folks were somewhat resistant. I mean, Greg in particular, who is you know, is my muse in some of the ideas, and I'm his, and you know, we kind of think of all of these ideas for the channel.
I believe he referred to it as your folly.
Yeah, he did. He's shut up about that now, because it's gone better than any of us ever expected.
That's awesome.
But I think part of that was because, even though we're both interested in historical gaming and Greg and I have a lot in common, we do also kind of run in slightly different circles. So I'm much more about online gaming. We both do PC gaming, but I engage in more online stuff, multiplayer, than he does. And so I'm exposed to things like Discord much more than he has ever been. And because of the 3D printing, I became much more familiar with how creators are using Patreon to support their work and the willingness of people to support it. Yes, it's great if they get something tangible out of it, but also the willingness of people to support it just because they like what you do and want you to keep doing what you're doing. And I think the stumbling block for Greg was always, well, we're already pressed to the limit as far as our time in generating content now. How can we generate more that makes it worthwhile for people to become patrons?
Right.
And so, that's why we did come up with some things like the podcast and stuff like that. But I, would repeatedly say, yes, that's going to draw some people in, but there is going to be a significant number of people out there who will just become patrons, not expecting anything more out of it than us just keeping doing what we're doing. And, why would we not? We're constantly at the time complaining about how we never have enough money to do what it is that we want to do. Why wouldn't we give them an option? And so in a poll at the end of the first season, we kind of asked people, well, what percentage of you would be willing to support us through a Patreon? And Greg was shocked at the result. It was like 60% of the people who responded. I was not shocked by it. Now, it took us, a good year to actually roll it out after that. But now we've exceeded all of our wildest predictions for what we thought we might be able to get as far as number of patrons and as far as how much they're willing to pledge each month. And because of that, if we manage to keep them and if they keep, supplying us with funds, we're going to be able to do things that we never would have dreamed that we were able to do with the channel. And
Think warp drive.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Operation Warp Speed. So it's, and that might be something that was a hurdle for us as historical wargamers because we are in an older demographic that we don't have that same outlook. We come from a generation where it's like, if I'm going to spend my hard-earned money, I damn well better get something for it.
Yeah. I feel you.
Which is why we're giving people medals. But
which I love, by the way. I think that's great.
All 3D printed. I tend to be the designer for those. I was just working on the design for a new medal that's going to be part of an initiative that we start at the end of the month, which is still top secret, so I can't reveal it here. But but that is something tangible, and people seem to love it. But when we asked in a poll question recently, why is it you decided to support us? It was like 90% of the people was, we just like what you do and want you to keep doing it. And that is incredibly gratifying.
Yeah.
And bizarre.
And bizarre.
Totally bizarre. Like,
because we're just a bunch of idiots from South Central Pennsylvania who don't know what the hell we're doing when it comes to video production, and yet we have fans around the world that love our stuff. It's great, but it is somewhat mystifying.
You have good production value. You guys have great personalities. I admit that I haven't watched a ton of your content, but what I have, I've really liked. And it was instantly when I saw you guys. And so, like, I come from a sales background, and we all know, like, a sale isn't the transfer of money for goods. A sale is the transference of enthusiasm from one person to the next. Absolutely. And you guys most certainly do that. You give that. Like, I got excited. I was like, this is great. This is great, and it's great content, and I'm glad that people are talking about this because I think that there is value there. And I haven't ever had somebody to sit down and show me the value. The people that play, I go to Miniature Market, and there's like one group of guys, and they are, it's like they want you not to even look at their table. Like, everybody else is like showing off all the stuff that they have, and they're just like, we're going to play this and we're going to get out of here before all the Magic players come in. Like, they don't hang out and talk. They don't do anything. As soon as the game's over, they're gone. And so I never get a chance to sit down and talk with them. And that's such a bummer because that's where you want to build your community. You want to figure out who you're gaming with at your local store. And,
the idea behind Little Wars TV has always been about evangelizing the hobby and really, defeating those stereotypes that we've talked about a number of times already, that it's just a bunch of, grumpy old white guys that play historicals, and you can't have fun with historicals because it's all dry and boring, and that's because history is taught in an awful way in most places in this country. But we wanted to show this can be fun. This can be stupid, goofy fun. That's why I do accents and hats, and I'm a federal prosecutor by day, okay? The last type of person you would expect to dress up like Napoleon and give some sort of, pitch on the interwebs for everyone in the world to see. But, that's my personality, and that's what a lot of our personalities are. Look at all of the stupid shit we have done over the last half years. Every single one of us. But that's because we have fun with it. And want people to know that you can have fun with this stuff, and it is accessible. It takes more work to get into, but it's there for you, and it's freaking awesome.
The infamous Historicon recap from last year, at the closeout of that episode where we were at Historicon, it is possible that several of us may have had a drink or two.
My God, we had to take 15 takes.
My girlfriend is watching it, and she said, "Were any of you sober for that?" I'm like,
Doesn't matter if we were.
Define the words.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
And it's funny, we're evangelizing the hobby, and we're talking about being more inclusive and trying to get people of all cultures gaming, and trying to destroy the stereotype of it's just a group of old white guys by making videos featuring a group of old white guys playing historical games.
You got to bake with the ingredients you got.
That's
Fortunately, we do have like Veronica, who has showed up in some of our episodes. My daughter has been in a few episodes. She's not a huge war gamer by any sense, but she just likes the idea of being on the interwebs, and she is very much my daughter in her sense of humor and sense of the absurd. So she's willing to show up and sing, and she cannot sing, and she knows she cannot sing, but she was singing in our one video along with a bunch of the other guys. Why? Because she thought it would be funny.
And it was hysterical.
And it's great. But those are the types, and she played in our one World War One Death of the Red Baron episode, which we closed out season 2 with, and she had a really good time, and was absolutely savage in her criticism of Miles, her teammate. But that's a teenage girl for you.
That's right.
But I will say that at recent conventions, when we still had them before COVID, I had noticed that the conventions did tend to have more and more young people attending.
Yes.
The number of young folks, and all the way down into the teens, attending is certainly a higher percentage than it was even 5 or 6 years ago. And I think that's fantastic.
And I think one of the things that it's a baby step, but that's where we have to start, baby steps. One of the things that they were doing was they are now recognizing and giving an award for best children's game or best youth game, which before wasn't a category. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that you have to include kids in your game. Some games, the subject matter and or the complexity might be too much for a 12-year-old.
Oh, absolutely.
It's war. War is in the name of what we're doing here. So some of the subject matter, maybe little Billy shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah.
On the other hand, games that are geared towards children, 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, that's where we're going to recruit the future of our hobby. And not just historical games, but fantasy games. And we're competing both in the fantasy game market and the historical game market. We're competing with a million other ways for kids to spend their entertainment time.
And you have this stupid ass little thing that like it isn't Games Workshop that's your biggest enemy. It's fucking TikTok. You know, it's like the things that actually are the things that are going to keep us all from like getting the young people excited is the technology barrier. And because I'm working so hard on my nephew, I'm working so hard on him. He's 13 years old. I'm just like, I got him to build a Gundam. I'm like, okay, all right, we're getting him in the right direction, but like, how are we gonna? I want him with a paintbrush. I want him like doing the hobby because I know him. I look at him and I see me, and I'm just like, I want my nephew to have this younger because like I think he will have a much healthier life, you know, having something like this in there instead of looking at all the time and drugs and stupid bullshit in the early 20s that like, you know, took focus away from the healthy parts of my life. You know, I if I would have had something like wargaming in a healthy community to play with and to hobby with, I think I would be you know, I would have less holes in my brain at this point. Minimally, that would be the end result, which is huge.
Well, I think there are a ton of positive things that can come out of becoming a war gamer. You know, Jared Fishman, who I interviewed most recently for our podcast just a few days ago, he is a history teacher at a private school in Westchester County, New York. And he has introduced to his school a wargaming program where the kids get involved. It's a school of 800 kids, and I mean, by his telling, not a single one of those 800 kids graduates without at least knowing about wargaming.
Nice.
He integrates wargaming, historical wargaming, into his classes.
Wow.
For his actual classwork, specifically, you know, and simulations, not just miniature wargaming, but simulations, gamification, that type of thing into his classwork. It's truly fascinating. He's going to be spearheading a new effort by HMGS, the Historical Miniatures Gaming Society, to kind of set up programs that can be ported to other schools as well. And I think that's important for a number of things because there are all sorts of things that you can get out of gaming, as you were just pointing out, Heath, that go to life skills. Forget about gaming. Just go to being a better person, to better be able to get along with people, problem solving, forward thinking. All of that stuff can come out of gaming, and
being
it's
a
also
good sport is huge. And being able to look at someone on the other side of the table and say, "You bested me, good job," like because like sports, they like to say that they do that, but when you're in the locker room, it is like the most toxic shit ever, and like they're screaming at each other for you, like. There isn't any of that. I mean, like there are places where that happens in wargaming, but in my experience, that is the far exception to the rule. Everybody is like handshake, look you in the eye. That was a great game, even when the dice are not going in your favor. Wargamers they're just thrilled to have that back and forth, and they've exercised their brains, and it's totally different than shooting someone in Call of Duty and then getting pissed off. Like the one-on-one person-to-person competition is huge, absolutely huge.
It's huge, and the beauty of it is it helps the hobby too, because if you look at the results that WSS Wargame Soldiers and Strategy magazine gets every year to their Great Wargame Survey, the retention, once someone gets involved in the hobby, the retention rate is astronomically high. Whether it's sci-fi or fantasy or historical, the retention rate, it's like once someone becomes a gamer, they may take breaks like you did, like I did, like Tony did, but you almost always end up coming back.
Yeah.
Or never leaving in the first place. So it's great for the hobby because you get someone exposed to it and hooked on it, they're going to stick with it, which benefits us all, and it's great for them individually. And I don't see any real downsides to getting someone involved in gaming other than the fact that you may have to end up selling a child to afford some of the miniatures.
Yeah, sure. Well, we have gone like way over the hour that I asked of you guys, and I really appreciate it. One of my favorite things I like to ask everybody before we wrap up is, again, coming from the sales background, one of my favorite acronyms, as that is all sales is acronyms. what's your BHAG, your big, hairy, audacious goal? You have this Patreon, you have a channel that is wide reaching. What do you guys see as the future of the channel, and what do you think you can be for the future of the hobby?
Well, it's an excellent question. I think if we were thinking about, and I certainly encourage Tony to jump in then, if we were thinking about what our biggest goals might have been, that's all been blown out of the water by the success of the Patreon.
Awesome.
So I think one of the things that we really enjoy doing is visiting battlefields that we end up fighting the battle so that we can show people what it is that we do. So doing some more of that, but that's still not a huge idea for ultimate. I think the ultimate goal is probably best expressed by what our goal was at the beginning, which is just to, lead the way or play some small role in the rebirth of historical miniatures wargaming as a widely participated in hobby. I would love to hear an end to the question, is historical miniature wargaming dying out? And if we, through the funding that we get from our patrons and from the work that all of us do on the channel, can someday get people to stop asking that question because it's not even something they're worried about, I would be ecstatic.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. To bring people into the hobby in whatever little part we play in that, and I think it's something that every gamer can contribute to, even if all you do, you talked about, Heath, the table with the gamers and they weren't having anything to do with anybody. If all somebody does in that scenario is say, hey, I see you looking at what we're doing. Can I tell you about it? How are you? I'm Tony. If that's all you do, each and every one of us can do something to evangelize the hobby and bring people into it. And if Little Wars TV does any part in that, then we're doing good. If I were to have to point to an actual thing, like some physical thing or event, and say, wow, this would be a huge ass deal, I would like to see us as Little Wars TV or us as the local gaming club, Army Group York, go to one of the big mega conventions, Gen Con, Origins, Adepticon, shoot some footage, bring some coverage of that by people that the historical miniatures gaming people, hobby participants know and recognize. Hey, here's those guys that do those games that we like to watch, and they're going to this new, different, more diverse community and showing us all the fun that's having here. And better yet, we're going to run a game there, and we're going to take some historical miniature gaming to somewhere where it doesn't get a lot of attention and try and draw attention to it. I think if we were going to do a physical thing and say, by God, that was some big ass shit right there, that would be a project.
I love that idea, and I think that Adepticon, Gen Con, I hear is, while it is continuing to grow, I don't know if anybody is growing in Gen Con, just because the noise is so big there. The board game stuff takes over all aspects of that hobby space. Maybe Wormwood Gaming is like the one people that just continue to like bust through the noise, and Kingdom Death for some reason, but like everybody else is fighting for the same spot. But like Nova Open, Origins, Adepticon would be huge. I don't think LVO is all just Warhammer 100%. I don't think they do anything else out there. It would be really cool to see you guys be a part of that. And there's been people from the like the Warhammer side of things, like Adam from Tabletop Minions has talked about historicals, and I think there's part of him that really actually wants that to be more of it. And I think that you could see that being, people love what he says, and follow him, not blindly. Like they have a really tight-knit community and they talk about these things. I think you get one or two people like that from that side of the hobby playing in the historical wargaming thing, and you'll start to see this hobby age very differently, and you'll start to see it move very quickly. As you know, someone's going to have to make STL files to get people out to play these games, to make their armies, because you know the 3 people spin casting their stuff in their garage are not going to be able to keep up with it. Which, you know, there's a definite.
Hey, I know all 3 of those guys, so
and they're all stellar human beings.
Yes. No, Adam is great, and actually, you know, his little stuff that he has at the beginning of at least some of his videos, maybe not all of them. I mean, but he's got the gunfire sounds and stuff like that. You know, there's a Sherman tank that shows up there for a split second. It's like, yeah, he's got historicals. And one of my favorite videos that he did was, you know, the thumbnail question is, you know, are you old enough for historicals? I'm like, the answer is yes. Yes, you are. I don't care how old you could have just sprung from your mother's womb yesterday. You're old enough. Okay. So, I would
There's
love.
a Monty Python skit in there.
Yeah, somewhere. You know, I think Tony's absolutely right. I think a greater presence. Now, to be fair, I mean, Warlord, Flames of War, you know, Bolt Action, they are showing up at some of these places.
Oh, yeah.
They've been at Adepticon. And so there is getting to be some exposure there. But, you know, part of the reason we jumped into the space that we did on the interwebs is because there wasn't really someone doing what it is that we were doing, and we wanted to be the first to try and fill that niche. And we've been, like I said, very gratified with the result. And if people want to see us at those conventions, we're more than happy to go. And you know, now we might actually have the funds to do it.
That's so exciting, and I'm so glad that you guys are having success in Patreon. Like I said, I am touched by my group of Patreon people, like just truly rocked. And it, you know, we're right now, as of this recording, 14 strong, and that is 14 people in this world that didn't have to support me, and they do. And that is something that, like, I come from a musician background. Like, there are shows that I have played that didn't have 14 people at them, and the 3 people who were there didn't give a shit about me. Like, these are people who week after week come back to this well and for some reason drink this fucking bullshit water, and I love it. And I'm so happy for them, because like I hope that it gives me this whole new like respect for the space, and it makes me want to share with them people like you, because I'm constantly reminded that the YouTube algorithm sucks for introducing people to new stuff. You like to think that it's doing it, but it's not. It is only giving you confirmation bias. You actually have to work hard to break out of the algorithm. And the second I do, I find Little Wars TV, and I'm like glued to the TV again in the morning. I'm sitting there with my cereal and like drinking my tea. I'm like, I got to talk to these people. And that's the shit that, like, somehow this hobby has to have crossover, and it has to, like, you guys should appeal to the same people. And there's so many people I know in the Warhammer hobby that don't have their space yet. You know, they feel like they're there, but they kind of put up with it because that's where their friends are. But like, maybe it's a historical, maybe they need something deeper and, you know, more rich going into that, has something that, you know, equates to where we are at as a modern day society. I don't know. These are things that I think about all the time.
Well, and one thing, and this is going to get into a little bit of YouTube inside baseball. People might not be interested in it, but I know we've certainly been exposed to it.
Yeah, I've got to go.
Yeah, exactly. Tony doesn't pay much attention to this stuff, but we put him on screen to look pretty. He's not the brains behind the organization. But no, the algorithm, it's a bitch. And, you know, we didn't do ourselves any favors when we named our channel. And to be quite honest, Heath, you didn't either.
No, I know. I fucked up.
Having Murder Basement in your name is not going to help you with the algorithm, in the same way that just having the word war does not help us in the algorithm.
In defense, true crime murder podcasts are the most popular things on fucking Spotify right now. So I'm just hoping that I scoop off some of those people.
Well, I mean, you know, Spotify, I mean, we're not as familiar with yet, but
I have
YouTube.
to admit, I was terribly disappointed, because it doesn't look like a basement you're in. It looks more like an attic.
I'm in an attic. Yeah, you guys caught me.
Right. I was like,
Yeah.
son of a bitch, I've been tricked again.
No, Heath, I don't know. Do you know the story behind why Beasts of War changed their name? It was because of the algorithms.
Really?
Yeah, we shared the Historicon press room. Does that sound pretentious? We were in the press room at Historicon 2019, and it was just Little Wars TV, and now they call themselves On Tabletop. And we asked them, why did you change your name? We had known them as the Beasts of War, and they basically said that they figured out that they were getting suppressed a little bit by the algorithms because they had war in their name. And we, Greg and I look at each other, go, well, we screwed up. So that's why they changed their name.
Interesting.
And how much has that limited us? We don't know. We've never done the study. We don't really care that much. We're growing steadily. We're happy with the growth. But maybe that has held us back a little bit from squeezing outside the little echo chamber that you talked about and being exposed to more people.
I mean, it is an explosive growth that we're looking here. Like, bonfires never stay lit through the night. Like, there is a lot of true, honest, like, thought process that goes into building it slow and low. This is a barbecue. This is a meal that we have invested our time in, and we are ready for the payoff when it does happen. But like, there's no rushing a good piece of barbecue.
This isn't happening overnight. What we're doing here.
No. And and with something like On Tabletop, like when they changed their name, I was like, it's still the same guys. And they're still telling me to ding my dong, which I'm sure the YouTube DeepMind doesn't like hearing either. But like that, like, it's still the same content. It's fine. And but like I was very confused on like what happened there.
There you go.
Why the change? Well, there you go. And I know, that's fascinating. And yes, I all my audience, they're just like, everybody's gonna love the Murder Basement. I was like, I totally know that I'm not gonna get the promotion that I need, but when I make it, everybody will be fans, and it isn't the fact that like people come in one week and then aren't there the next week. And that's what you guys have. You have the community. You'll
never know when it is that something of yours hits big. We have built our entire channel around our tentpole episodes, half an hour long, history at the beginning, then a game, all of that sort of stuff. You look at our most popular videos, none of them are in the top 3 or 4. What I can tell you right now what they are. One is us on a farm, Greg's farm, shooting historic guns.
Nice.
Okay.
Nice.
Because a couple of the guys are on film shooting an MP40, and because there's some, battle royale game out there, I think it's called Free Fire. I've never played it, hadn't heard of it until people started leaving comments. And I guess one of the best guns in the game is the MP40. So a bunch of people are online looking for MP40, shows up, and now that thing has 100 and some thousand views.
Wow.
Next one, Greg went to San Antonio, took his iPhone out, did a tour of the Alamo, cut it together for a little 5-minute tour, totally as an afterthought. It's blown up, and it's one of our hugest. It's like, and then
we put 2 days into filming.
Yeah, and Greg takes, half an hour on an iPhone on a business trip, and it becomes one of our most popular videos.
Wow.
And don't get me wrong, we're not complaining about it. It's great because it brings people to the channel who wouldn't otherwise find us. And we can look in the analytics and find out that, okay, our subscription rate went way up right after that video hit it big, so we can definitely attribute it to that. But there is no predicting what it is that you do that's going to become the hot video on YouTube. And it's
some iPhone footage of range day scores higher than something where we spent like 3 months painting 2,000 miniatures for.
But my favorite comments on that MP40 thing is the targets that we made up. It was actually part of a game that we played where, the losers had to construct targets and do all the work to arrange the game day. And it was a World War II scenario, and so all the targets were made to look like German soldiers.
Nice.
So that we were shooting Nazis, right?
Shooting Nazis.
Well, of course, the video has like Chow shooting an MP40 at the Nazis, and all the comments are like, why are you shooting Nazis with a German gun? It's like,
Because no matter how you kill a Nazi, it's good stuff.
Exactly. It's like we're not gonna make a mock-up, American targets to shoot. That's a surefire way to rub everyone the wrong way. But
Here we are shooting Belgian nurses with historic German weapons.
Oh, Jesus.
So it's crazy. The internet is a crazy place, but we've had a lot of fun with it. So
Hey,
can't complain.
it's this weird thing of content creation, and I love that part of this hobby. It is something that is way more important to my life than I gave it credit for, and I thank COVID for making me realize that doing these things, these interactions, I've needed this in my life ever since I quit playing music. I didn't realize that this is the stage that I needed to be on, because like doing the one night at the Way Out Club here in St. Louis, which is one of the most demoralizing things. It's never good, even when it's a good show. Like this is one of the cooler things in making these friendships and these bringing these communities together. To me, is just absolutely huge. So I thank you guys so much for being a part of this.
Thank you
Absolutely
for
our
having
pleasure.
us.
Yeah, thank you for
Excellent.
having us.
Thank you for making it through another episode of Hobby Time in the Murder Basement. I really appreciate your support. If you'd like to continue the support in other ways, I do have a Patreon. The link is down below. Proceeds from that will go to pay for new equipment, subscription fees if I need it, and graphic design stuff. I'd like to help build this channel. So any of your support is, while never necessary, is always appreciated. If you want to see more hobby stuff, you can head on over to Twitch. I generally stream on Sundays at noon. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.